Choreography at the University of Akron, and I'm coming to you from Akron, Ohio. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is a part of the Happy Hour Artist Talk, Choreographing for the Screen, and it's a part of GroundWorks Dance Theater's Next Space Fall 2020 events. We're so delighted to be able to partner with them this evening and really get into a discussion about what are we doing in making work for the screen right now, not only out of necessity in this time of COVID, but also as a creative invitation. I'm really excited to welcome a range of panelists and speakers this evening, some choreographers who you may know, some who may be new to you, but we're really excited to welcome them back as NCC Akron alum. And I'd also like to start our discussion by acknowledging there was an op-ed written in the New York Times this past summer in July 2020 by the dance critic Gia Corliss. And she started it off by also saying, how much can choreography flourish in a coronavirus world? One thing the last few months have shown her is that while Zoom is a useful tool, it's not a vehicle to transform the art form or to take it to another place. And that felt like a challenge to me in reading it. I don't discount what she says, but I also wanted to acknowledge that people have been choreographing for the screen long before COVID and long before Zoom. And so let's dig into a little bit more about what that could look like. I hope you'll join me in welcoming Cara Hagan to the screen this evening. Cara is coming back. Hello.
Hi.
Wonderful. Cara is actually going to be joining us virtually at the University of Akron this fall as a part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. And this is with support from the University of Akron and their Mary Schiller Myers Lecture in the Arts series. And this is not Cara's first time working with us. She was actually a mentor as part of a screen dance lab that we hosted here in Akron in 2018, which feels eons ago. But so excited to welcome you back, especially given your role not only as an educator and a maker, but also as a curator with the American Dance Festival's Movies by Movers. So thank you so much for joining us, Cara.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. It's almost like we're here together again. I'd love to start with what is screen dance, because not everyone necessarily uses that term, but let's start at the beginning. What is screen dance?
Yeah, so screen dance, dance film, cinedance, video dance, it's been called many different things, but essentially we're trying to get to the same thing. So what I always tell folks is that screen dance is one, some, or all of the following. It's site-specific, camera-specific, and edit-specific, meaning that it's something that is created specifically for the screen in a way that can't be recreated in real life. Because when we put movement or we put people or places or objects on the screen in digital space, it means that we extend the capabilities of that thing or those people physically. And in some, I think that screen dance is magic because we have power over the laws of time and physics, and we can do whatever we want, almost.
Almost. But you can certainly do a lot more than when you are trying to bring everything into a theater, if you're trying to go on a 10-city tour and bring everything with you on the road. And I know we've talked about the economy of choreographing for the screen as opposed to choreographing for the stage. Do you approach these two ideas differently when you are making a dance film? Do you have a different place that you begin than when you are making a dance for the stage?
Well, I think for both, you start with a seed of an idea, and the first stage for me is always to play. So I always have what I call unadulterated groove time, which is time for me to just, without any ideas of where it's going to go or how it should end up, to just begin to play with whatever idea that's percolating in my head. The place where those two art forms or genres begin to split for me is when I start to consider the space that they will exist in. So if I'm creating something for the stage, I'm thinking of where the audience is going to be. I'm thinking of where the lights might be, how the grid is going to be, you know, how big the stage might be, and how I'm going to create something for either a theater space or perhaps a live specific space, which is very different than creating something for the screen, because then you have another participant, which is the camera, right? So you're bringing in the camera not just as a witness, but as a participant in the making and the showing of what it is that you want people to see.
Let's talk about that camera as a collaborator. Is this something that you're finding, you know, you have to always have lots and lots of tools, lots of fancy, expensive cameras? Have, you know, what are we talking about in terms of, is it always another person? How are you actually getting into the making of that?
Yeah, so like any art form, this art form has the possibility to be very grand and expensive and very the opposite of that, right? You can use what you have. So my projects have ranged in scope from, you know, smartphones, filming myself, to having people on crew who are using cameras that we've rented that are more expensive than stuff that I want to buy or have the ability to buy. And so it really runs the gamut. But what I always tell people who are starting in this art form is to start with what you have, because you're comfortable with it. Learn to use the tools that you have that you can be comfortable with so you can actually do the art. And then you can begin to build your technical repertoire as you get deeper into the art form.
Nice. I realized I was so excited to get into our discussion. We didn't even get to show your trailer yet, and we made sure to line that up. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kat. We'll go ahead and mute our screens, and we'll take a brief moment to watch a little bit from your trailer. Thank you. We'll go ahead and come back in. Awesome. And that we may have muted too far, so we'll apologize for that. Also want to acknowledge that we'll be dropping in as many of these links to works that we both share and works that we discussed this evening in our YouTube chat forum, so that you can follow them up on your own as you continue on this journey with Screen Dance. Also want to acknowledge, please feel free to go ahead and share any questions. You do not need to wait and hold your questions until the end. If you have specific questions for Cara or any of our other guest speakers this evening as we continue through the night, we hope that you won't hold back, and we look forward to hearing from you. So Cara, I apologize for that sound. It sounds like typical, anytime you add technology, you add more of the risk that something will go wrong. But there's such a range in that, you know, certainly very specific scenes, ideas, a lot of stillness. I would love to hear more about Monster Newsfeed. And this is something that starts the trailer, and it involves some stop motion, which it kind of reminds me of my like PBS Sesame Street days. You made me feel like a kid again. So your spirit of play or unadulterated groove time definitely resonated. Um, Tell us more about like, where did you begin with that? How did you make that?
Yeah, so when I was thinking of making Monster Newsfeed, I was thinking of the bombardment of information and stimulus that we experience as people who are on computers, on phones, looking at television, seeing even just billboards and newspapers and all the different media that we consume every day. And, also the kind of timbre of divisiveness that sometimes happens when you're in that space, and how there's like FOMO and I mean, just so many different things, and how the news cycle continuously seems to be more negative than positive. And it seems sometimes hard to find positive stories in the news to attach to. So this was really about being overwhelmed. And so the character in this particular film is exploring her or their power with regard to those things, those devices, those spaces. And so the character begins by being overwhelmed by them, but eventually finds their power. But I'll leave it to folks to see it in a festival to see whether or not the character wins. So, and I wanted to use stop motion, live stop motion, I call it, because I'm using my body for the stop motion instead of movement in real time, because it gives it that kind of cartoonish quality, and it gives me the opportunity to be able to extend the capabilities of my body in that little snippet that you saw. I'm flying through the air. I can't do that in real life, and I don't have the money to make a rig and go into a space and fly me like Peter Pan. So this was a way for me to explore some of these ideas that I had in my head in a way that I felt like I could really play with, and make it so that, yes, it's talking about something that for many of us is a serious topic. There was actually some research that went on behind this film to find out, how many hours do we spend on our screens a day? And what does it actually do to us physiologically? So that's all in there, but it's not necessarily apparent. I didn't want it to be a science project, but I wanted to be informed going in to make it. And I'll say also that I've been interested in stop motion since I was a kid. So there's a couple of videos, like VHSs, around my house somewhere, where in 7th grade, a friend and I made a couple of stop motion videos, and I had left it for a long time, just kind of forgot about it, most especially when I first got into screen dance as a younger maker, and was really enraptured with this idea of choreography for the screen and how that works. But then I was like, you know what, actually, choreography can be anything you want it to be at the end of the day. And it really just matters about how you put it together. And that in screen dance, because the edit is the final choreographic act, this gives me a bit more bandwidth to play with some different genres of filmmaking that we may not think of right away.
I wanted to point out not only Monster Newsfeed, because it's more recent. I think that's just in the last year or so, but it also felt like this metaphysical commentary on exactly the moment that Gia Corliss was pointing out. She was like, "Why are we watching dance in this two-dimensional format?" And you were like, "Well, this is what you can do with it, but the content also has personified our online lives, whether it's the likes, whether it's the different platforms, how we're getting news and information, and it isn't maybe as two-dimensional as people think, that it can actually inhabit your body and your mind in some ways." So it was very poignant. Highly recommend checking out the full film as well. I am curious, when you talk about like the stop motion, which is not a new idea as well, and I love that you were exploring that as a kid. And it's these low tech, like basic premises, kind of returning to that I appreciated when you were a mentor for our Dancing Lab artists in 2018. Can you describe the picture frame exercise that you walked our teams through?
Yeah, so often when I do this work as an educator, I'm doing it with dancers, and I relish the experience of being able to have dancers and filmmakers, dancers and other folks together working on this. But often we find that there is a bit of there needs some translation to be done. And I think that when you have a group of people who are used to working in three-dimensional space, this idea of translation from three-dimensional space to two-dimensional space can be a bit of a tripping block at first. And so I use actual physical picture frames as a way to have people, both dancers and cinematographers, collaborate on small studies where they're looking through this frame and actually moving it around the space together as a way to start talking and a way to start sharing language. And then we take those small studies that happen in three-dimensional space, give folks cameras and have them translate those ideas into two-dimensional space and see if those ideas stick or they need to be altered in some way to live in a different medium.
Mm-hmm. And once again, like so beautifully simple, but something that it's like, oh, we can get sort of overcome a little bit by the technology sometimes because we don't know how all of that works. But we had another part of our conversation in talking in advance of the work you're going to do with UA students this fall, right? Like we've all been practicing how to cut and edit, right? How many takes that we may do of that one shot before posting it to Instagram, and what that is a reflection of. So I'm curious how you're continuing to push your own practice. And I want to sort of lead you to tell us a little bit about artistic surrogacy. That's been an extension of that. And that's also a new term. I don't know that we use that too often or too far spread yet.
Yeah, so I think these days I'm really interested in collaborative models, right? So filmmaking from its very inception has been a collaborative practice. And I'm interested in collaborative practice in digital space, but also in physical space, whatever that looks like. And so artistic surrogacy came from a wondering of mine about issues of access in the arts and most specifically institutionalized arts, where some people's voices are privileged over other voices, and there are so many barriers to being able to participate in the arts landscape as a professional that I wanted to find a way to mitigate that. And how does one do that with care? So basically artistic surrogacy, and that's a term that I coined to be able to describe this in a couple of words, but it's a method of sharing artistic concepts through performances, presentations, experiences, objects, which are shared in that one person's ideas are placed in the hands of another so that they can be executed in the absence of the originator. So essentially, this is about translation, it's about trust, and it's about caring enough about somebody else's work to carry it forward when they're not there. And so what does that mean? It means that we have a way of transmitting ideas across borders, bodies, and in ways that uphold the work and that honor translational growth, essentially.
And have you been using Zoom for this? What kind of tools are you using to do this work?
So I'm having a lot of fun doing this with both digital and analog tools. So because you and I have spoke, you know that one of my love languages is snail mail. And if I love you, you'll get snail mail from me. And so I have encouraged folks that I've worked with and folks who have participated in shows that I've curated around the concept of artistic surrogacy to do some sort of a mixture between analog means of communication and digital means of communication. So sometimes this manifests in a series of handwritten letters, right? Sometimes this manifests as a series of objects sent through the mail. Sometimes this manifests as finding someone who can bring somebody else something for you. Of course, this also means Google Docs. It means Jamboards. It means Zoom. It means GroupMe. It means Snapchat. It means Instagram. It means all of those things as well. All of the communicative methods that we have, you can use as part of an artistic surrogacy experience. It just depends on what folks are bringing to the table, what they're comfortable with, and what you're trying to achieve.
I love that reminder that just because it may seem like the only way we can communicate is via Zoom, we have so many other things. And I'm going to have to replay this later because I don't think I even know about all those tools that you just sourced too. We're very excited that in addition to working with our students at University of Akron later this fall, that you will be continuing what we're calling our community commissioning residency through the spring. And this is very new. We're still in the process of making it up. And I want to encourage everyone not only to stick around for when you'll come back later and speak with the rest of our panel, but stay tuned because we'll continue to roll out more of Cara's work in the months and in fact the entire year ahead. Thank you so much, Cara, and we'll look forward to having you come back later.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Before we move on to our next video, and I will still stick to the script this time, and we will show the video, I wanted to give a little bit of background. So this was a dancing lab that we hosted at NCC Akron in July 2018. And the premise was we know that dance is scrappy and a lot of times people are making their whole work from beginning to end. They're shooting it themselves, editing it themselves, maybe even dancing in front of the camera. As Cara said, you can be as expensive as you'd like, or you can also be as scrappy and nimble as you need to be, because that's what we do when it comes to making art. But we created a space where we would pair choreographers with filmmakers and also provide a full production team, a director of photography, a grip. I had never even seen that beyond the credits beforehand. And the artists arrived in Akron on day 0. Day 1, they got to do Cara's studio exercise, get to know each other a little bit. Day 2, we did a site visit along the towpath trail here in Akron. We rented bikes and they looked at 6 different sites that we had permitted. Day 3, they rehearsed in the studio. Day 4, they rehearsed on site. They filmed on day 5 and day 6. Day 7 was supposed to be rest, but no one rested because both teams ended up also designing and composing their own sound scores. And then day 8 and 9, they edited in post-production. And by the time they left on day 10, we had 2 5-minute dance films. It was with that experience that we got to host Mike Esperanza, our next guest this evening. But first, we're going to play his film, But First. Excellent, excellent. Please join me in welcoming Mike Esperanza to the party.
Hi, everyone.
You may recognize him
Hi.
from the credits. Hooray. And Mike,
Yay!
are you joining us from location in Utah?
I am. I'm filming in Utah. So
love
I'm at the school with the kids. So.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What was it like to revisit But First? I mean, now that was 2 years ago.
I mean, I feel like we had such a great time doing that whole thing with Aaron, Brown Thomas, and the dancers. At first, we were like kind of like weren't sure of how the approach was going to be, but once we got everything settled, it was such a like seamless kind of process. Because I remember you guys looking at our shot list, and you guys were like, "That's pretty ambitious," and we got it all done, and it was so cool to just, you know, be so like aggressive and gung ho about all the shots and stuff. So it's really cool.
At what point that week did you decide that you were also going to design your own sound score? Because all of those were recorded sounds and that you then mixed and layered together. So I'm curious, in speaking of process, like where does one begin and where does one, you know, what happens next?
Yeah, so I think once we got the concept together and I created like almost just a click track just for the choreography and the beginning, and then and Aaron was like, "Why don't you just do the whole thing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I could do it. Like, if that's the case, then I will like end up doing that." And then so all these sleepless nights trying to do all the sounds. It was a lot of fun, but we ended up doing the sounds with the you know, at the coffee shop, and it was just so amazing with everything. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I'm curious because you are one of those artists. This wasn't your first film, but it was one of the first times you had like a support team. You weren't having to be a one-man show behind the scenes. So I'm curious, any particularly memorable lessons learned?
You know, it's really to trust the team. It's really to trust your collaborators and just to learn from them, because you come in you know, with a sense of knowledge of how to create and direct and you know, navigate through a film. But when you have you know, you have people who are specific to their craft, and you just watch them, you know, do their thing and what they bring to the table, and it's just so amazing for them to listen to them and to watch them and to really like kind of like digest everything that you're learning at that point, because it's so valuable. Because you know, you hear certain things and it seems familiar, but it's another thing to be like, ah, that's what it is. Like everything just kind of clicked in that point, and just watching Erin edit was pretty magical of how quickly she did that, and
Mm-hmm.
watch Tyler to do all the cinematography was amazing, and
Mm-hmm.
just with all the focusing and just everything that just goes into a film is you just never see it until you have that full gamut of support. And so
It,
it was just so nice to be in that environment.
yeah, I mean, it was as a witness through this process. I think that I found it particularly satisfying when you would give feedback to Tyler or some of the crew, or Aaron and the dancers would be
Hmm.
able to talk to each other, right? So it
Hmm.
wasn't, I'm going to do my thing and you're going to do your thing, and then it comes together, but it truly was collaborative in that.
Yeah, so it was nice that Erin had a movement background, so she
Mm,
did a lot of aerial work, so she knows, how to connect movement and how to make sure the choreography is seamless on camera. And
mhm,
so it was really nice to talk to her about that. She even knew how to cue things in and how to work with the dancers without
mhm,
having me to do the whole thing. But like we were really like working together in
mhm,
order to make the dancers understand what was happening. And so when she got into the editing room, she knew exactly what to do.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. This this idea of trust and also directing, I wonder how it might have sped into a project you did early on in COVID that I was actually fortunate to watch in rehearsal,
Hmm.
and that was wallpaper.
Hmm.
Why don't you tell us about wallpaper?
So wallpaper came out of this want to the desire to perform again, and this was early in May, and so we had spoken to the dancers because we had originally planned a show in October for our 15th anniversary, and we wanted to celebrate by combining both the LA company and the New York company. And so since we everything had put on hold, we had put this idea together about performing together through Zoom and incorporating it through OBS and presenting it on YouTube Live as a seamless live edited film on YouTube. So um, I spoke to them and we put together like a couple of pieces that we already had, and we created new ones. And with that, we figured out how to, you know, do the live editing through Zoom, and then I learned OBS fairly quickly and how to stream to YouTube. And so it was just like a quick learning process for all of us.
Mm,
But they literally had to, set up their camera, how to work through that. And so it was a huge learning experience for all of us.
mm,
But and at the end of the day, it was just such a satisfying experience to even have that. We had 18 dancers in 5 different states, and so it was just so awesome to be together in that short amount of time. But like
yeah.
it felt like a real performance,
Yeah,
so it
no,
was
it
pretty
definitely
cool.
did to watch. And I had seen actually, I think, a studio performance of Wallpaper
Hmm.
also offline. So there was a certain familiarity. Um, Real quick before I forget, what is OBS or what does it stand for?
Open broadcast system. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that's correct. But it's mainly a gaming system. It's
Mm,
made for video gamers to show, themselves playing games and with them like talking to other gamers. But it streams online to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, and so forth. But it was mainly a gaming system that they used that was introduced to me through another dancer, and we just like kind of did all the research for it and made it work.
cool. And what I wondered from my experience watching Wallpaper, so
Hmm.
you have not just one site, not just three permitted sites to play with, but now, like you said, 5 different states, possibly 18 different homes. Um, and it seemed, especially as you followed certain dancers, that we might see one dancer and then we would cut to another dancer, and when we went back to dancer A, they had a different camera angle. It could be in a different room, it could be a different angle in the same room. I'm curious, like, what kind of cameras were they using, camera phones? And then two, like, how you were directing them, not just on how to point their foot or how to move, but also like, how to frame themselves. If you can talk about
Yeah.
that experience.
Yeah. So before we even started rehearsals, I asked them to photograph their space and to find different angles that we could set the camera up. They all had iPhones, so we just used the iPhones. And for rehearsals, we used computers, but when we were doing the performance, we stuck to the iPhones because it was easier to transport around the space. And so we figured out all the shots for each scene, and so by the time we rehearsed, we figured out how to move the cameras around quickly. And what's the nice part about it is when it's streaming through OBS, you can only see the visuals coming out of Zoom and coming out of your iTunes, which is connected to OBS. But I could still converse with the dancers as they're moving. So, for example, we had a duet that was originally together, and a lot of contact. And so I had to cue each thing for the duet in order to sync it, so each movement was completely, if I went from one person to the other, they were in both the same sequences. So I had that ability to communicate with them through that.
So crazy. So what of the experience with wallpaper, if anything, led you to develop COVID, which was an initiative that you had launched in late August? And I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do we jump from there in May to this huge initiative in
I
August?
know.
Tell us about that too.
So a friend of mine and I had been working together, and he's been in the company for a long time, off and on. And so he runs, he actually helps out with Queensboro Dance Festival out in Queens. And so he's like, hey, we should do a project together. And so I had been working through wallpaper and the workshop and a couple of other projects through doing this whole same format. And so we wanted to put together a whole, a 40-hour shootout, with social distancing, in the rules. And so the director, the cinematographer had to be separated from the dancer choreographer. So we wanted them to teach each other how to navigate their camera, how to do these edits. There were certain things that the dancers learned, what certain shots were named, and some of the directors, cinematographers were like, "Oh, that's how you do that movement. It needs to connect." And so a lot of the conversations that they had was really about like how do you learn from each other in order to make this dance film. And so the conversations that they had were incredible. So it was really useful for them individually, as far as like how to navigate through this film and how to move your camera around separately. It was cool.
What I appreciate, whether it was intentional or not, is that making work for the screen in some ways allows us to, I'll use Cara's word, play more often. There is, it to be a little less precious about, well, I'm mounting this thing and it's an evening length opus, but thousands of people coming. And so they experience both with wallpaper and with COVID, as an experiment that you were like, all right, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And I clicked through on that link, and you have some technical snafus, and you're like, great, next, here we go. Right? Like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
If Zoom and technology is more and more central as the new normal in our world right now, COVID, I think that we also have this heightened sense of passion for technology, that we would have been mortified if that had happened in a big theater. But it's like, oh no, that's right. We're also showing how human we are in dance too.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's certain things where like I had a lot of colleagues who were teaching in the collegiate level, and they had to learn all this stuff so quickly in order to teach or even to communicate with each other. And so, like, I was listening to their kind of point of view and see how they were going through that through the pandemic, and almost the latter part of their semester in the spring, they're like, we have to do this next week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like you guys are like crash course into how to do an online course, and you have to do this and do that, and it's like it was insane, like what they were going through, and also very humble to like just to witness them make these choices in order to communicate with their students. So it was just incredible for them to like garnish all that, and then make sure that everything is still running smoothly for their students.
You also have continued to teach online almost since the beginning of COVID as well. And you have a beautifully simple solution that I haven't heard a lot of other teachers have done.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that as well?
Yeah, of course. So I set up a back camera behind me with my iPhone
Just
that
like
connects to
behind
Zoom.
you in the studio.
Yeah, and what's nice now is that on the new Zoom, you can actually spotlight two people. So you can actually spotlight your front camera and your back camera now. So, which is great. It's just a useful tool. Most people are just like, want to follow like they are following you in class, and so they just love that back camera. They just feel like it's almost feels very normal to them, which is nice to hear.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that I think this moment and the shift to technology, the crash course online, as you acknowledge, it reveals things that we had taken for granted, things that we had, just had been practicing. Maybe we'd been dancing for 24 years and we're like, oh, that's right. You know what? I don't follow Mike in real life. I follow Mike's image in the mirror when I'm taking
Yeah.
class. And then all of a sudden, we've changed that whole paradigm that people feel even that much more ungrounded. So I love
Yeah.
you were like, oh, well, here we have something for people who go both ways.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful solution. Thank
Yeah, it
you.
was really funny when I first did it. They were like, "Wait, what's going on?" I'm like, "No, just follow me from the back." They're like, "Are you real?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's my right hand's my right hand, my left hand's my left. Just follow."
Yeah, you're like, there we go. To wrap us up, do you want to tell us more about what you're making there in Utah or any other current projects going on?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you about our new project. So we're actually started another project with the company last week, and that we're finishing up in November. So we're actually in person doing a full piece in one room or one space, and then doing multiple cameras with surveillance cameras. And
Oh.
so yeah, we're trying to figure out how to make the viewer have that choice of which camera to watch the piece. But we're putting like 8 cameras around the space, whether it's from above, from below, inside a drawer, inside a closet. That way you can see the whole piece in around from different cameras. And then we're taking that to John Jay College, which we still have our residency in February, and so we're doing that in their theater, which is
Nice.
cool. Yeah.
Amazing. See, lots of new ideas and forms, and I so appreciate that. We didn't have any questions for you yet, but stick around because we'll be
Yes.
bringing you back with Cara later. Thank you so
Awesome.
much, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, more soon.
Okay.
And next up, please join me in welcoming David Shimotakahara and Antonio Brown to the screen. And we'll bring both of them in. I'd like to take this moment of transition to also remind any of our viewers, please share your questions inside the YouTube chat. We'd love to hear from you. And we will have a panel discussion with all of our speakers at the end of this as well. Antonio, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Christy. How are you?
Good, good, very good. I'm not seeing, and there's David. Fantastic. Excellent. Now, you're both in Cleveland now, yes?
Yes.
Welcome home, Antonio. Antonio's a native to Cleveland and has been performing for the last decade with the Bill T. Jones Carney Zane Company, and had been part of a commissioned project with GroundWorks Dance Theater this fall under David Shimotakahara's leadership. And taking COVID in stride, I so appreciate that David and Antonio said, let's do something on film. And we had a moment also where we went back together and we watched both Mike's work, some of Cara's work, a lot of work that's been happening, not just in response to COVID. But I would love to reflect on that experience about kind of what y'all noticed. It's been a month now since we had that discussion. And to tee it up, one of the phrases that still stands out to me was something you introduced, David, which was you noticed there was such an economy of movement. What did you mean by that?
Well, I just became aware that the choices that had been made in terms of what the camera was seeing, what it was recording, it struck me that it wasn't really about maximizing movement necessarily. There was different, it had a different focus, or the choices were different in a lot of the films we watched. Not all of them, but generally speaking, it struck me.
Yeah, that was one of those options. I'm curious, Antonio, as you were sort of fine-tuning your creative mind, how to begin, where to begin, what did you notice from taking a more critical dive at Dance on Film?
Yeah, that experience was so great for me because I got to see so many different possibilities on how to put a work together virtually through film. In that sense, because at the time I didn't necessarily know what direction I wanted to take into it. And so it was really nice to kind of, step back, see so many different options, gave me so much inspiration to kind of dive into and kind of think about in the work that I was going to start making. And yeah, since then I've just taken those ideas and really found myself really digging in and starting to really create what story I wanted to tell and kind of dig into things that way.
Well, and we had a similar artist talk earlier in the summer, shameless plug, if you want to go back on GroundWorks YouTube channel and watch that and hear more about Antonio's process. But I remember you were already, as a DJ, as a multimedia artist, have that already in your wheelhouse. So where are you beginning now with this new video tool and platform as well?
I decided to start with just purely movement. Again, I went back to a place where I was like, okay, sound will happen at some point in time. And so I just decided to dig in with movement. And I found a couple of pieces of music that I began to form an attachment to. Mm-hmm. And I just started to kind of play around with it. I just put it in the air and just started working with the dancers. And this was a fun, I've been enjoying this because we're dealing in these, unnormal circumstances. And so starting rehearsals with the dancers, we actually all started virtually on Zoom. Mm. And so that was a nice way to kind of break the ice and start. And so we had a week of just working, creating material, me getting to know them. And from there, we were able to join together in the space. And from there, just magic just kept happening. And really happy and really pleased with the directions of things that are happening.
Mm. And are you working with a filmmaker? Are you doing all of the video work yourself? How did you choose to proceed?
Oh, yes, no. I wish I was doing all of it I wish I was not. Definitely glad I'm not doing it all by myself, because that's, video work is not my expertise. Similar to what Cara was saying, we all get kind of familiar. Like, I'm used to recording myself, with my own devices, and used to kind of recording other people as well. But trying to put it together into a bigger picture, definitely not something that I wanted to dive into with this. So I actually called on a really good friend of mine who was a videographer, Hagan, and we worked together before in the past with my company. And I decided to bring him in on this because his eye is so great. He has some of the same similar instincts that I have, and he also brings some new things to the table that I just love. And so collaborating with him, and he's making it work. I mean, we're kind of just a two-person team. He's, doing all the video work, and I am acting as his assistant in this case for a lot of it, other than the choreographic side, but just helping him along the way with, what he needs technically on his end. But the same kind of process, we are, came into it. I was like, okay, these are my ideas. And we sat down and we just talked through them. He had watched a little bit of the material that I had created so far. And and I showed him the spaces that I was going to be creating and work in. And from there, we just, we sat down, we created a shot list as we needed, and took it from there. We've just been riding it out so far.
So have you shot everything so far, or are you doing it over a longer period of time?
We're currently shooting right now this week. So we've finished day 2 of our shooting. We have one more day coming up, and we've been just digging into it and really finding some really cool gems. It's kind of really amazing to see, these things, these ideas, these images that you have in your head, and then to actually see them. It's one thing you get to see it created on stage, but to then actually take these, more abstract, ideas and images, because we can do that with the camera work, and really see them come to life in that sense. It's been really great to experience.
Yeah, you don't have to wait until dress rehearsal to see all of the scenic elements come alive.
Exactly.
It's true. Hey, David, so I'd love to hear how you're tackling or approaching this creative invitation. You've consciously called it not a dance film, but an auxiliary project. Tell us more.
Yeah, no, I wasn't prepared to sort of say, okay, I'm going to do a dance film. But in fact, that's what it's going to become. And, I'm not trying to, I love what Cara said about sort of, I'm not quoting her, but I think she intended, to start with where you're at. And I think because the technology can be so intimidating, and the prospect of sort of how to really, use it, I really felt I needed to just think about this in as simple a way as I could. We actually started working with a videographer this summer. More as it was sort of a last minute arrangement. I needed somebody to document. We did an in-person live drive-in performance. And I created a new work for that, a duet. And I really wanted to record it in a way beyond just documenting the performance. So I asked, his name's Brenfleck, and I asked him, if he would just come in on short notice and see what he could do. And really, he did some amazing camera work, which really caught my imagination, and sort of set the camera in motion as part of the dance in many ways. And I just love that that feeling that it created, and gave me a whole different sort of perspective, and I think experience of my own dance even. So I think with this new project, it's we're going to just try to go deeper with that, and I know that the thing that you remember me saying about, you know, when we talked about screen dance was sort of the economy of movement that appeared, that I noticed, and I've decided to sort of go against that, and I really am interested to find out, you know, what is actually the limit of movement that, you know, remains interesting and not confusing, and and to really kind of use this, I mean, the camera, as you have said, you know, is really interpreting the experience for the viewer. And so all of the ways that can happen, and to make that really come alive in a way that's part of the dance, that there's no separation. We're just going to try to do that. The other thing that I'm excited about, at least in Akron, is we're going to hopefully be able to film it in the same location that it will be screened. So that'll be kind of an interesting experience, I think, for the viewers, and we're hoping to get access to the top of a parking deck, and we'll see what happens.
We have some of those here.
Yeah.
Yeah. That also reminds me, because we had watched not just straight dance films, but watched Adam Weinert's The Reaccession of Ted Shawn. And although you may not be applying the augmented reality technology, the idea that you're filming it and making it in somewhere where you would be showing it, even if you aren't performing it live, also feels very much sort of the play within the play within the play. I have to also say, when you talk about doing the opposite of the economy of movement, that I immediately went to like Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge, because I happened to see that film like in the very first row of a movie theater, but it was just so larger than life. And so I'm excited to see what comes out of that too, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and this is such an unfair question because you're in the middle of making it, but for either of you, do you feel that it is changing how you work as a choreographer in some way? Or is it too soon to tell yet? I think Antonio's going to wait for you, David.
Go ahead, Antonio. Too polite. He's too polite. Go ahead.
You know, I would say no.
Okay.
I want to say no. I believe so far in this process, I've been trying to, in a sense, enhance the way that I work as a choreographer, and really try to, literally, I mean, zoom into the functions that I use and the tools that I use in creating and crafting my work in general for the stage, and now also for the camera. I'm trying to see how many details of those things can I really, zoom in on and pick up. So I don't feel like I'm changing it or altering it in a sense. I feel like I'm actually enhancing the process for myself in that sense of creating work.
Yeah, it sounds like a strong sense of self and how you work, and then let's turn it up. Where can you turn it up in the specific medium?
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Did you want to say more? I didn't mean to jump in on that for you.
Oh no, I think that's good for me right there.
Excellent. Well, you vamped appropriately for David. David, do you feel this creative exploration is changing how you choreograph.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat, I think, as Antonio. I would say it's changing. I like what Cara said about, you know, these three kind of domains that she thinks about, you know, location specific, camera specific, editing specific.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way it's changed my process is, you know, I intentionally created the work in sections, in small bits.
Mm.
And those bits were generated sort of out of context. And so although I'm assembling it as a dance in my mind, out of all those bits and pieces, I'm waiting to see how those bits and pieces actually fit together in the editing process. I'm not, I don't expect it to feel the same or have the same effect as if it was a continuous move, you know, dance in a live stage setting. I'm hoping it won't. Yeah, I'm hoping it'll have a very different effect. And I think so that I would say is a sort of a different sense of like, okay, the composition isn't complete in my mind until it's filmed and edited. Does that make sense?
It does. One more question before we bring in our other friends back, but I'm curious, when you aren't making work on film, do you typically engage video of rehearsals as part of your process? I mean, I've worked for some companies that have tons of VHS tapes of rehearsals that will never see the light of day, but it was so important to document along the way. Maybe the choreographer would watch, you know, in between rehearsals, or they knew they were going to put a dance aside for a couple of months, so they'd capture it and then, you know, go away and come back to it. Was that already a part of your practice, or not so much? Yeah. It was definitely something.
Yeah, that's a big part of the way I compose now. And I record everything in rehearsal. And then I work with it in sort of in isolation almost, and then bring it back into the studio and rework things. But there's a lot of sort of, I like that objectivity that gives me with the material, and it gives me time to really kind of analyze it and just digest the material in a different way that I don't find I'm able to do in the studio in the moment. I get way too carried away with, you know, just the presence, the energy of the dancers. So I feel I've over the years, I've felt I need to kind of develop a way that I can just assess, you know, the movement in a more objective way. And that's one of the ways I do it.
You know. So even if you weren't making a film, it sounds like you were, you know, it was an early step into editing, to be able to spend that objective time with the material too.
Yeah.
I love that.
Sure.
Yeah. What about you, Antonio? Do you tend to film a lot of your own work when you're making live performances too?
Yes, I do. And that's been something that I've used similarly to how David does, where I can actually, you know, I tend to film all the phrases and everything that I come up with in normal rehearsals, and then I can go back and kind of rearrange them and play with them. How are they configured? Take away things that I don't need from them, go back into the studio, rework them, re-edit them. And that's also where I usually get a lot of my scores from when I, compose the music or edit the music for all these things. I try to really line them up in that sense so that, I make sure that I'm, relating to them equally. But I definitely use a lot of the video work in that sense. I've even gone as far as taking things that I've videoed of myself, like if I'm just in the studio playing, I've brought back phrases and things like that I've made like from 10 or so plus years ago that I found somewhere buried in the archive on a hard drive somewhere, and I'm like, what is this phrase? Oh wow, that's interesting. Let me maybe use this for something, and I'll bring it out and try to relearn it and teach it again, see what I find from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and I think I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's also one of the challenges of translating the work that is innately from maybe unadulterated groove time. Cara's given us so many words and phrases this evening to then say like, okay, do this. This is what I want you to recreate. Certainly.
No, right. Because we work with improv in this discovery way. So the only way to remember it is to record it, and that's a very, very important part of our process. So, yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, friends, we're going to welcome our colleagues back. Please join me in welcoming Mike and Cara back to the screen. I'll take this moment to invite any of our viewers at home. Thank you for practicing safety, Mike. Any of our viewers at home, please feel free to encourage and include your questions in the YouTube chat. We'd love to be able to hear from you and respond. But I've also asked all of our colleagues and speakers, since they come at this from so many different perspectives this evening, and hope that they will ask each other questions. Cara, what has come up for you as you've listened to some of these other artists?
Well, I love hearing about everybody's process and how you're approaching the work. And I loved the question about whether or not making something for film for Antonio and David has changed your approach to making choreography. And both of you said no. And then it was really interesting also to hear that, but of course you're using some of these technologies to archive your work. So I suppose, I don't know if there's much of a question in there, only that it's interesting to me that no matter whether or not we define ourselves as screen dance makers or not, we're always doing it. Like everybody is a content maker. And so in terms of those videos and things that you're using for rehearsal, how much of those get shared, say on social media, as a way to invite people into the process?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking even before our panel discussion, and I was sharing that, there was an artist that was going to make an evening length premiere earlier this summer. And instead of immediately saying, well, I have to put the whole thing online, she said, I actually edited some things out because it just didn't fit in evening length live theatrical idea. But that work that was on the cutting room floor is actually something that she's revisiting now. Maybe that needs to go online and it becomes something else. It truly does become auxiliary. And it's the things that I have no doubt that dance artists are so generative, and we are constantly have been editing ourselves to fit within that festival format, within that performance opportunity, that this now range by being able to post things online and otherwise, it's not an onslaught of everything. But one of the things that Gia Corliss brought up is it's about quality over quantity. And so look at the abundance of what we have, and then how do you want to pick that out and apply it differently and try it out in different ways as well. Mike, what's come up for you? Anything you'd like to ask your colleagues?
I mean, I feel like I think the big question of what's next, or even where do we go from here, is like a big question. I feel like I've been asked that a lot these days, as far as like, what do we do now? What do we do this you know, where is this going? Is this like something that we all have to get to and start doing? And I feel like, how do we garnish this whole experience and help everybody kind of move forward from where we're at right now, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, I might, give you some time to think about if anyone wants to try and answer that, but to acknowledge, specifically with But First, Mike, I was never more aware of, we spent just as much in terms of what you would spend to make an evening length work and maybe perform 3 times. And instead, we have created a 5-minute film that is toured to 20 plus cities all over the world. So it comes back to that question of economy too. I'm not saying everyone has to make dance films or should make dance films, but one of my hopes is that people who have tried it because of COVID will find like, hey, maybe this is something that I would want to do more next, that next grant opportunity. I'm going to apply to make a dance film as opposed to another dance work for the state.
I have to share with you a meeting that I had with Dance Now in 2012 or 2013, where the panel was one of the choreographers in the panel was encouraging dance film, and the rest of the panel was totally against it. They were like, "It's not the same. It's not the same." And now we're in this. I feel like we're in here where we're at now. I feel like it's completely opposite. It's just it's a thing now.
What a difference a pandemic makes.
Exactly. I always I remember that exact room, that exact where I was sitting. The people that like, oh my God, I can't believe this question is even being, asked, and I'm like, wait, it might be relevant in the future.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
David, Antonio, Cara, any thoughts about what's next?
I think that my hope is that we'll begin to, like Mike alluded to, be able to expand what we consider worthy or valuable in the field. And that certainly, as somebody who's been making dance films for a while and having had those experiences where grantors are like, but is it really choreography if you're making it for film, or, and kind of having that hierarchy of what constitutes good dance and what constitutes dance at all. And these are conversations that we're having in our educational institutions, like what is the hierarchy, or why does it exist at all? And how can we better privilege all kinds of forms of dance and forms of engagement in terms of our artistic work? And so even in this time when people may be feeling a little oversaturated with the presence of dance on screen, my hope moving forward is that obviously people will have found new ways of making and doing, and that we can start to balance out where we find all of our different art fixes, right? Like maybe some of it's in digital space, maybe some of it's in intimate live spaces in someone's living room, maybe some of it is in a big theater where it feels like, oh, this feels nostalgic now, and I'm also hoping that once we're able to be together in space again, everybody's going to give each other hugs.
Yes, bring back the hugs for sure.
You're here.
David, what's next?
Oh, I don't know what's next in the broader sense. I do know, for me, it's an opportunity to grow, and I agree with Cara and in thinking that it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. You really, but with no pretense about knowing how my work will evolve. I know that at this time I need to explore other tools, and I need to be thinking about it in a more expansive way. And I think that's been huge. So Yeah, I'm just going at it the best way I know how. I know we had to pivot as an organization. We want to stay connected. We don't want to just sort of, lie dormant. And I think this is the opportunity. And yeah.
Yeah, I think we're really on the cusp, and I know it feels hard to say, but it's been 7 months, but like people are still like, okay, fulfilling the pivot. And I think that as grant writing season lines back up, I always find that helpful to inform the creative process. That's an invitation to dream, where people will go, well, okay, if I'm not trying to make good on what I thought I was going to be doing this time of year, but now I can think about, well, what might I want to do a year from now, 2 years from now? And expand that, knowing especially what we do now that we likely will have to change, because who can predict anything right now as far as space and time. Antonio, if you have thoughts on what's next, but I'd also like to invite you to share if you had questions for your colleagues.
Yes, I mean, for me, what's next is, I think, the same thing. I'm really eager to just keep exploring the many possibilities where I can keep connecting to my audiences, keep broadening my audiences. I want to try to use this way of connecting with people to see how far I can reach out and how far I can connect with as many people as possible, and to have them experience my work and see, how many connections I can make that way. And yeah, so that's why my brain is always working, and it's always imagining, and it's always dreaming of different things. And so I've been allowing, throughout all this time so far, to just keep allowing my brain to be active in that sense. How many different ways can I really use this time period to keep recreating and reimagining how I can stay active, how the community can stay active, how we can keep, doing what we love to do and still having those people feel those things as if we were still in the same space sharing it together. So I'm dreaming big over here, trying to think of what could come next in the future, and fingers crossed that maybe half of those things can happen. I know maybe not all of them might happen, but at least we're going to aim for half.
No, I love the attention to like who and the audience, because I do think that that's the other opportunity. One with dance films, or this as a medium, you can see something more than once, right? You don't have to deal with the access challenge of like, I can't afford a $75 ticket or a $40 ticket, or maybe the show's only running for one night only. But the fact that you could revisit, like, what a great opportunity for audience members who can really spend time with the work, who can develop a deeper relationship with an artist, with dance. But then also, thinking about Mike, 18 dancers, 5 different states. When you're teaching class, they're spread out all over the country as well. In this moment, that's very different than the sort of, I've developed my following and it's from people that are within, a 5-mile radius of my home, right? Like that's a more localized experience that artists have normally been afforded, as opposed to thinking expansive. So bring it on, Antonio, let's go. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Christy.
Yes, actually, I wanted to know from both Cara and Mike, as you guys have been developing dance films, and I've seen them and I love them. Are you guys interested in exploring different ways in creating your dance films as you go? I know you have very specific ways in which you have been creating them. I want to know if you're like branching out in the different versions or variations that you guys might come in contact with and encounter.
Cara, what haven't you tried?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things I haven't tried. There's a lot of things that I would like to do. I mean, like Antonio, I think that there's no shortage of ideas, but there is always a shortage of time and resources. And I'm trying to, as I can, have my fingers in every piece and part of this screen dance thing because I love it so much. So those who know me know that I've been and am writing extensively about it, that I'm making things, that I want to be able to do installation work that, you know, obviously COVID makes a little bit more difficult. And I want to be able to collaborate with all of my favorite screen dance makers. Like, y'all don't know, I'm a fan of so many people, and they probably don't know that I'm a fan, but I am. And I very much want to continue to follow their work with hopes that one day we'll get to work together, you know? And then also in terms of bigger ideas, in terms of technology and what I might be able to do with that. I mean, I'd love to do some more stuff with like motion capture. I've had a couple of chances to go into a mocap studio, but have never had the resources or the bandwidth to be able to really do a project in a space like that, which I would really, really love to do. So
cool. Yeah, let's put it out in the universe. Mike, in addition to surveillance photo, or film and footage, what do you want to try next?
I'm actually interested in working with holograms, and so trying to put holograms together to layer movement and film to almost make it feel like an animated film, where they have different cells that are layered together. And so I'm trying to work with a venue out in Brooklyn to work with this installation that could potentially have live performance and projections with holograms to kind of do that whole thing. But you know, you just have to get everything together. It's like technology and costs and resources are it just doesn't stop anywhere. So it's tough. But you know, the ideas are there, but it's just how do you get to do that. So it's nice that I get to speak to a lot of people and see what's possible. Yeah.
Nice. I love that. Dance holograms. Let's go. David, did you have a question or comment?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, I think this is a question maybe for both Mike and Cara, because it strikes me that there's kind of there's two very different ways of creating, and also what results is very different when you have a sort of pre-edited screen dance product versus live mixing, you know, which is a very, you know, has many different sorts of challenges. And what is, in your mind, what is the future of that live mix format? Is it in some ways, you know, how are you satisfied with it creatively? Are there restrictions still in your mind because of technology, or is it as a form, does it have limitations? I'd be interested to know your perspective.
Yeah, this idea of live mixing and also acknowledging, like, maybe it didn't have enough dance, but the TV's been doing live mixing for years, right? So yeah, I'm curious. Thoughts? Anyone want to jump in there between Mike and Cara? Cara unmuted first.
Yeah. I can jump in first by saying that dance and live mixing has been happening for decades, and that when early TV was happening, Pauline Kohner and Kitty Donner were doing live mixing for choreotones. We don't have footage of that because you couldn't save stuff back then in the 1940s and early TV, but dancers have been doing this for quite a while. I think, though, that there obviously, because of the advances in technology, we have so much more available at our fingertips to make that experience more expansive. And I know that Mike has been working with this, and that there are other dancers who are working with this and trying to figure out ways to make that live mixing experience not just something that people watch, but that people participate in some way, whether they're watching in an active way, whatever that means to a project, or that they're contributing to what actually happens in terms of live giving of instruction or input in some way. So I think that there's a lot of room there, given what we have access to today and given what people are hungry for, to think of it in an expansive way. But I'd love to hear what Mike says about it.
I mean, I feel like there's so many ways to approach it, so many ways to like kind of problem solve, and it's really about like, you know, I think Zoom for me has brought people together for some weird reason. I've spoken to people that I haven't spoken to in a long time through Zoom, and I'm like, this is oddly weird that I speak to you every week, but before this, I have never spoken to you, maybe like once a year. And so I feel like the connection that has brought is great because the collaboration between the artist in that way has been like, so it's so nice because I think we're fulfilling each other's kind of what we're missing, right? And so like I feel like when you're doing the live editing, we're missing that sense of performance, and so we're missing that sense of connection with each other. And I think part of that is just the fulfillment of like just connecting virtually or even in person. And so like the conversation to what is this iteration of dance movement composition is just basically how to solve that whole connection with each other again.
Yeah, I might take that as an opportunity to reflect this idea that there's still lots of art to be made, that it's not a sense of like how many different tricks and technologies can I, toss into the mix, but why? What do you want to achieve? And which technology might be the best way for you to make that possibility happen? The moment that some call COVID the great pause, and that is certainly a moment to slow down, to reflect, to look inward at our own choreographic processes, at our histories. Thank you so much for bringing in even TV in the 40s, Cara, to reflect like, wait a minute. And I've even seen like, video that's used in the backgrounds of stage performances in the 80s. Hey, I love that you've got guest stars, cameos. You go work hard in rehearsal, Mike. But I want to acknowledge, like, we might not have been able to bring everyone together for this conversation. And I'm super grateful for that, because I think having y'all in dialogue with each other, I've learned so much. I hope that our viewers have also learned so much. I would be remiss not to thank 83rd Brewery as a sponsor. This is a happy hour artist talk series. So we appreciate any partnerships between the art and business sector. I support our restaurants, support our arts and cultural organizations in these times. Thank you also to the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture in the Arts series at the University of Akron, the School of Dance Theater and Arts Administration. Thank you to our team at NCC Akron and also GroundWorks Dance Theater, and especially to all of you, our panelists. This has been a quick evening and robust, and I hope something that you learned as much as I did. Please join me in waving goodbye, and we'll go ahead and sign off.